quick reminder, each episode could contain some game spoilers, so please listen or watch with discretion. And now, your hosts for The Gamer's Advocate, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Gamer's Advocate, where we just basically go over subjects that are interesting to us, but hopefully to gamers in the bigger scope. But of course, you get 1,000 gamers in a room, you might get 1,000 different opinions. But today's topic, we're going to be going over remasters, reboots of traditional games that have come out in the past and maybe have, for one reason or another, had a makeover. Now, before we do all that, there's some interesting games that are coming down the pipeline that I've noticed might get some of y'all's attention. Kom, do you have one that you're looking forward to?
A game I'm looking forward to in the near future? Yes. Death Stranding 2. I don't know what to expect from it, and that's what's really tickling my fancy. It's the wonderful idea with Hideo Kojima that you can trust him to do something different. You can trust him to try something new, and you could almost always trust that he's gonna, if not always hit it out of the park, he's always gonna do enough with it, that there's enough there to love, enough there to appreciate, enough to talk about. And I think he's proven with a track record that he's one of those developers you can just put your faith in. So, do I know what it's gonna be? No. Do I think Death Stranding 1 already in and of itself was a full and complete story and didn't need a sequel? Yes. Am I simultaneously incredibly happy that he's coming back in and making one? Absolutely. So for me, Death Stranding 2.
I feel like he's one of those guys who really takes all of the advice we've put together into consideration. And when he makes a game, it's a good one.
There'll be even more walking in this one.
Yeah.
Twice the map.
Oh, I hope so. Remembering that my ideal challenge run was flying around the world in real time.
Yeah.
in Flight Simulator. Get me a bigger map. Oh. What about Banana?
I would say, and for similar reasons, Frostpunk 2. Looking at the sequel to Frostpunk, I don't think I would look at Frostpunk and think there's a lot of different ways to go with this. I feel like the first game really kind of captured it. And I'm very curious to see how they build a second and where they go with gameplay and storytelling. Just because I genuinely can't think of where they're gonna go.
Frostpunk is more of a RTS though, isn't it?
It's certainly like a resource management game more than anything. And that's kind of, I think within the framework they've built from the first one, I can't see too many different avenues to take that gameplay, but I would never have come up with the first one to begin with. So I can't really say that I have a good understanding of where you can go, because I wouldn't have even gotten as far as they have.
Well, let's see. I have a very long list of games I'm looking forward to, but in the immediate future, for me, it's Planet Coaster 2. I don't know how productive I'm going to be.
So we're all picking sequels?
Yeah. Well, maybe. When Planet Coaster came out, it ran fairly well. It's never been fully optimized, though, even on modern PCs. So there's a lot of things that you try to do in that game that really the game won't let you. They're not modders. They're just, well, you can add mods to it, but they're not native to the game. And a lot of the assets that you get from their workshop don't always work. And so it can really break the game. So it's going to be really interesting with all the new sim games that have come out that have had some really great ideas, like Prehistoric Kingdom, that have like assets that you can resize. I think they're going to come with that in mind, that they're going to have to like not just put out a game and slap a 2 on it. There's going to be water park that you can do that wasn't in the first game. I do think the assets are going to be rescalable. So it's going to be really, really interesting. Hopefully they come up with different themes with it too. I hope they come up with a cyberpunk theme. I definitely would buy that pack too. I mean,
do you like this cyberpunk theme? I never would have guessed from our own branding.
It's really interesting. I don't actually love the cyberpunk theme per se. I just like how games have done, have made the theme interesting. Because that, if I'm going to pick up like a comic or a book or something, not going to be in the cyberpunk universe. But gaming, I think there's been a lot of interesting things for that. But yeah. And then after that, probably Veilguard, because that'll be this year as well.
Yeah, I think we're all
I
a
think we're
bit
all ready
excited for
Veilguard.
that one.
Yeah, it may bomb, but I'm not going to say, oh, this is a horrible game. BioWare's lost their way. Oh my good reactionist.
I'll say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I've very much planned on leaning into that. My script's half done.
Okay. Wonderful.
I mean, let's be honest. I was going to complain about the game even if it was a masterpiece.
Okay.
Let's not overthink this. This is what we're doing.
Yeah. As long as, because we know about the companions and things like that, I just hope it doesn't play short. Like, to me, Mass Effect 3 was always, if they just had 2 more companions, just 2 more, I think it could have been a little bit more. Today's topic, like I said before, was going to be remasters, reboots, games that have already been established, or I don't know, maybe for one reason or another had a remaster come out. I was thinking Alone in the Dark. I think that's Alone in the Dark. Yeah.
Yep.
That came out this year. I played most of it, and I was playing most of it because I was trying to get that nostalgic feel from it, because the original Alone in the Dark was nothing like this remaster. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's nothing like it, because the original one did inspire Resident Evil. So if you like Resident Evil, those are its roots. But it didn't receive a lot of fanfare because it wasn't really well optimized when it came out. And that's the problem with a lot of these games that come out. But again, at least they were trying something. They were trying to put something in a modern bottle. They were pouring their magic liquid, their magic formula in a modern bottle, and it just wasn't jiving with it. It was creating a mixture of color that they probably wasn't intending. What's interesting is that, of course, you can play it as one character or a different character, and it does give you some different perspectives. But outside of that, it wasn't really groundbreaking or anything.
I think it would have suffered upon release when you say that there wasn't that much anticipation for it. It didn't have the build up. It's not that beloved a franchise. It definitely has its fans. It has people who love it, but it never reached that iconic status that a Resident Evil remake would have, a Final Fantasy remake would have. So it was always going to be slightly hamstrung by that. It's a shame I never played it, that it didn't turn out to have the quality we desire. It's always nice when you have a game that's a bit less anticipated, but somehow finds its way above just through pure force of gameplay. It's a shame it didn't, but you can see how they were off to a tough start remaking that franchise.
Yeah, I would say that there's almost like an analog to remakes and remasters in the gaming industry to covers in the music industry. So if you see somebody take a song that has already been written, already performed by an artist, they cover it, they kind of make it their own. And in the world of music, when they don't, it feels off. When they're just recreating the exact song as it was recorded by a different artist, and they're trying to match the original artist, you end up with kind of a lower quality product in the end. And I think you'll kind of see that in video gaming as well, where if you're not just doing a graphical update, you kind of have to add more. You kind of have to take the game and make it your own again. And maybe that's what Alone in the Dark didn't have. Maybe that was just kind of a modernization of it, and there wasn't enough to really hype up the release of the remaster. But I would say that there's, the other side of that is when you make a beloved game your own, is your own version worse? And that's always like a very real prospect that you have to consider. Are you changing elements of the game that the community loved and replacing it with something they won't appreciate? It's a tough one to find that balance in.
Right.
I love that idea of the comparing it to music, because it is very true that if an artist does a cover and it's not doing something new, I almost don't see the point. A live cover is one thing. You want to go on stage and play tribute to a song, go ahead, play it as it was written. That's all well and good. Cover bands, they have their place too. But if you do have a major artist releasing an album and there's a cover going on that it's not just a little B-side, you've got to do something new, or I have no desire to listen to this whatsoever, because the original is still there. And that's what gave me that love for that song. And I mean, this is where a lot of the beauty of, I suppose, two of the classics is Jeff Buckley's version of Hallelujah. And there's a lot to say for Leonard Cohen's version still. But Jeff Buckley did something new, and that voice, My Oh My, and Johnny Cash's version of Hurt by the Nine Inch Nails. Two people took an original, changed it up completely, and gave you this entirely new feeling. And that's a great way to do a cover or to do a remake. And I would generally lean into that camp in my video games as well. I don't really care that much if you're going to release a game with upgraded graphics, and that's about it. Because the original is still there. And you will very rarely see a game truly update the graphics. For example, Final Fantasy VIII Remaster. They updated the graphics a bit. We've still got the goofy camera angles, and I love them. But they're very much off their time. You've still got that. You've still got these odd little 3D guys running around on these backgrounds. And it almost looks a bit weird when the graphics are too good, because you associate that method, that way of making games with graphics of a certain time period. And honestly, if I had the choice, and I don't because I don't own the original anymore on a way that I can play them, I think I would probably play the original rather than play the remake or remaster. It just didn't really do anything for me. And I think I'd like to see us take more of that attitude from music into video gaming. If you're going to remake a game, I don't really want to see the word remaster. I want remake. I want reboot. I want reimagining. I definitely want rebirth.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Like, I don't want repeat. I want remake. I want a reimagining of the game. And I think you'll see it in music when it's not there. It's just not working out. And I think you'll also see in video gamings those like two ends of the spectrum, where you'll have somebody who goes in and makes and remakes a game, and it kind of becomes almost more important than the original. I mean, you'll see that in music. Otis Redding's Hard to Handle. Most people forget that's even an Otis Redding song, because it was the original version was not particularly popular. The Black Crowes version is their biggest song.
Yes.
And that's kind of mind-blowing, is that their biggest song is a cover that we almost forget is a cover. And then on the other end of that spectrum, you'll have Taylor Swift's September. Nobody needed that. That's it. Just, it didn't need to exist.
The amount of songs that exist that are Robert Johnson songs,
Oh, yeah.
that nobody knows that they're Robert Johnson songs, is criminal. That lends itself that you, as an artist, know you can't just cover Robert Johnson. You have to be a pretty talented artist yourself. So every single artist that I've known, that I've listened to, are usually phenomenal artists in their own rights. So there is that. Eric Clapton, maybe you've heard of him. So.
That's always going to be the thing. It's the talented artists are the only ones I'm going to listen to anyway. I want to listen to their covers. If Jerry on the corner is going to be making his cover of a song, I don't really care. It's giving me no reason to listen. But yeah, I want to hear. I mean, why not? I want to hear Clapton redoing. Okay, it's already been done, but redoing Crossroads. I want that because I want to hear their take on it. I don't. Yeah, it'd be a shame if he just did it the way that it was initially written. And I think, honestly, a lot of my favorite games in the modern era, and this is going to be a bit of an old man sort of shouts at cloud attitude to gaming. I liked what I liked as a kid, and now if you give that to me back and you've refined it and tuned it up in some way, of course you're going to get my attention in the way that a new IP is going to struggle a lot harder to do. I think that's a natural part of getting older. You like the stuff that you liked as a kid. It's the same with sports for me now. I love sports, but I'll be honest, I'm barely up to date in football with modern players because I'm still obsessed with Gareth Bale. I'm still obsessed with Eden Hazard. I'm still obsessed with players who were there when I was younger. And I still think that generation of Ronaldo and Messi playing against each other was the best era of football there will ever be. Probably talking complete rubbish. This will almost certainly be matched at some point in the future, but it's synced up with my childhood. Now, considering that, there were games that I played as a kid, and I'm not going to say Final Fantasy VII. I'm going to say XCOM. XCOM is
Fully expecting you to say Final Fantasy VIII.
We've been there. I played XCOM as a little kid, really struggling with that game. I was probably 7, 8 years old, something like that. Really struggling, barely understanding what I'm doing. Maybe succeeding in one mission, losing half of my soldiers, remaking all the soldiers so they had that funny hair, the one that went up in a triangle. And that was all. But that game made an impression on me. And then when they remade that, and that's not a remaster when they came out with the new XCOM, they completely rethought the way that they approached the game. They rethought the amount of troops you could have on the battlefield. They rethought about how heavily they were going to actually script the events. They rethought about the ways the aliens act when you haven't activated them. And in a way made the game a bit easier in that regard. The classic XCOM experience in the old days, and not in a good way, was you load into this mission, you take the first obligatory step out of your aircraft, and you're being gunned down by someone off the map. There's nothing you can do about it, and your first soldier's dead. So they reimagined, reworked, and I think that they took XCOM and they made it from a game that a lot of us had these fond feelings and memories of into a genuinely viable modern game that went on and I think has influenced far more than it had any right to. The name XCOM could well have been forgotten. And they did exactly what they needed to do and just made something new and genuinely beautiful.
I think, I think that element of adding something new or revisiting and refining elements of something you're familiar with is at its core why remaking and rebooting works. Because you'll even see it within a single game series where they'll continue to produce games, and technically the next game in a sequence is not a remake or a reboot. But if it's just the same stuff, it's not it doesn't have the same appeal. And I'll kind of, as an example, and this is gonna piss off people, but as an example within that category of games in a single series, like if you look at Skyward Sword within The Legend of Zelda, there are some things they added that are new to Skyward Sword, but overwhelmingly it's the Zelda formula. And it's not that interesting, to me at least. There are some people who love Skyward Sword, and they're perfectly free to love Skyward Sword. But for me, Skyward Sword was the culmination of the developers trying to adhere to a formula that worked in 2 dimensions and not really innovate anymore. And that's why the game after Skyward Sword is so tremendously different. Breath of the Wild is nothing like previous Zelda games. It's genuine innovation. It's taking the game series in a completely new direction. And that's why you'll have a lot of people who are like, it's not a Zelda game. Maybe not. But Zelda games kind of ran their course. It needed to be something new. And within that same series, Majora's Mask is almost a remake. It's taking all of the assets from Ocarina of Time, but it's a very different game. And I think it's showcased what they could have done if they prioritized innovation. And especially because Majora's Mask was taking a lot of existing assets and building a new game in a tight time frame. It really showcased that, if they had adjusted their priorities to build just a new experience within the world of Zelda, they could have gone a lot of different ways. And that's why I think I enjoy Majora's Mask as kind of an innovation within the Zelda series, even though it does seem like people wanted just more of the same. Wind Waker is kind of Ocarina. Twilight Princess is kind of Wind Waker. Skyward Sword is kind of Twilight Princess. But Majora's Mask is Majora's Mask. That is very unique. And Breath of the Wild is Breath of the Wild. That's at that point prior to Tears of the Kingdom, which also added innovation. Nothing in Zelda was like Breath of the Wild. So that was very much continuing the series, but going in a new direction. And I think that's analogous to a remake and making it your own.
But it's quite interesting with Breath of the Wild in particular. I remember when it was released, that you almost felt like people didn't know how to describe it, and you saw that in the way people talked about it. You saw sometimes that it's an open world 3D game with almost Souls-like combat, and I'm thinking, it isn't. It doesn't really have Souls-like combat, but I can see what's happening here. Is we're looking for language to describe a game that's doing something that we entirely didn't really expect it to be doing, and doing it in such a new and interesting way. And it's not a game I like that much, but I can appreciate the hell out of what they did, and simultaneously appreciate it for the marvel on a technical level that it was, with all of its what's the word, the physics systems that they use in the game for puzzling in particular, which is so interesting. And that idea of innovating within a series, I think, is something that should be appreciated more. If you have a beloved series, and this is where I would defend, to the point of absurdity, the remake of Final Fantasy VII and then the following game, Rebirth. These games have built up a lot of credit and love in the hearts of the fans. Not, sorry, the remakes, but the original. So Final Fantasy VII, there's a whole bunch of us who are already, I love the characters, I love the world, I love the story, etc., etc., etc. And I'm very much in that camp. And my goodness, am I glad that I can get and easily play the original. I love that I can play that on the Steam. I love that I can play that on the PlayStation. I think it's probably on the Switch by this point. I know a bunch of Final Fantasies are. But the great thing about that, in my mind, when it came to Remake and Rebirth, and it was the same with XCOM, was you've got this established set of characters, established laws, established set of rules for the world. You're in the best position to innovate out of anyone. Because if you have to come out with a new game onto the market and you're trying some brand new systems people haven't seen before, and they're a bit weird and a bit out there, and you combine that with new lore, you combine that with a new world, and you've got no goodwill from me, your risk just became bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you've got that little bit of goodwill that's there already, I've already got a reason to dive in and try out your new experimental game. I'm not saying the Final Fantasy is that experimental. In the end, it's an action RPG. There's not much more to it. It just does it very, very well. But I would love to see games with well-established franchises try something new. And it's not always going to be good, because XCOM did release the Bureau, and that's not great. But they tried something. And I will always appreciate any studio who's willing to get out there and try something.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before, I am looking forward to Veilguard, despite all the vitriol I keep reading about. I just have to, because it's just I have to keep my finger on the pulse of the community. But to me, from what I've seen, I haven't been able to play a beta. Nope, BioWare hasn't reached out to me. I'm here, BioWare. I've been beta testing your stuff since the beginning, so I'm here. Okay, that's all I got to say about that. But it appears that it's combining a lot of elements, the best of elements, between Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect. And that's not a bad combination. There's even aiming in it. Dragon Age, you've never aimed. So they are doing things differently. So I really am looking forward to seeing how they're taking that risk, because they don't have much credit anymore after Anthem and some other stuff. I will not, the game that shall now be named by me.
Only because we can't pronounce it.
But no, it's interesting that they are taking that many risks, but I like what I'm seeing. I know on the surface it doesn't seem that, but I mean, they do have the emotional chat reactions. They do have a party system that seems to play. The UI is a bit complicated, but that may get fixed. I don't know. But to me, it looks like Mass Effect in Dragon Age universe with aiming. That's nuts. In the era of live service games, this will give you the option to play offline. Amazing.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
I can't stand that crap.
But it's the norm. It's the assumed now. It used to be the exception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, it's another feature that like everybody hates this. And I was like, but it's actually combining things that you might actually like. Just give it a chance. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's the element of it that we've talked about before, where people are speculating on a game that hasn't been released yet, and they're already complaining about things.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you don't even know if that's part of the game. Take it down a notch. Wait until it's out before you start complaining.
I mean, we don't have much more to go by for Veilguard than what, a 15-minute gameplay reveal and a 30-second, 1-minute trailer ish. Yeah, it's nothing to go by.
I would say also there are certain elements of what you guys brought up before, but there are some exceptions. Mass Effect had its Legendary Edition come out recently, and what a lot of people just really wanted was a playable modern Mass Effect, which is what they got. But as a seasoned and a heavy criticizer of Mass Effect, I really would have enjoyed if they had combined some of the best elements of Mass Effect 3 and put those in 1 and 2. So for instance, even just going throughout the galaxy where it would give a percentage of the system that you explored, that was great, because now I know what I've done. And if I've 100%ed that system, but then I came back to it and said, oh, it says 85% now, it's because it opened up something that I haven't. I needed that, because in the previous iterations, it didn't give you those options. And also the puzzle game that you had in Mass Effect 2, it's the same puzzle over and over and over. And really even Mass Effect 1, really. Why do we need that when we have an Omni tool? Mass Effect 3 figured that out. We have an Omni tool. It's doing it for us. We have Glyph. We have whatever. It helps keeping the pace of an action RPG become more of an action RPG. So I really like those things, but it was one of those things that was just part of the game. They said, let's just keep it. It was almost like, it definitely was not, but it was like a copy paste of this is what the old game was. And here it is with just modern graphics, which I totally appreciate. You can play it in 4K, but really they didn't do much with that. And so that, I think they could have done more. But a game like WoW, they came out with Vanilla WoW, and everybody had been begging and begging and begging for Vanilla WoW. And they just said, no, the famous quote of, you think you want it, but you really don't want it. And that just was the worst thing to say to gamers, because you're telling us we don't know what we want, right?
I mean, they were right.
Yeah, no, I'm fully on board with that quote generally in the arts. Generally, I think people don't know what they want.
Well, that's true. But I think it was a little bit of both, because unfortunately they didn't just make Vanilla WoW. See, what made, for me at least, Vanilla WoW was really special because of the grind and the community. You could just grind WoW on your own, but it was a community thing. A lot of times you would stumble into a friend who would help you out every once in a while. Not a friend in real life, just somebody you ran across, and y'all were always leveling about the same, because the leveling was so slow that between 15 to 20, chances are you're going to do 2-3 dungeons, and you're going to see this guy 2 or 3 times maybe. And you start seeing this over and over, and the community starts kind of meshing together organically. Well, now they have a level boost. They have, the leveling is faster. You don't need to do all that. And it's all about getting to the end game. It's all about getting to the raids. It doesn't make any sense to combine those things with what made the original WoW and Vanilla great. So it's like they did listen to the players, but they also implemented their own things just for the purpose of a profit, which really hindered the ability to go back to a game that was good on its own.
That's kind of where we get into like the distinction in these categories of remake, remaster, reboot. A remaster, you might get minor graphical improvement. They're not going to overhaul the engine. They're not going to overhaul models. They'll likely just improve textures, and things will look a little bit prettier. They might, if you're lucky, implement quality of life improvements. Maybe not. That's a little unfortunate in my eyes, because I think after any game is released, you'll see players kind of pinpoint the exact parts that they find tedious, that they find inconvenient, and they'll give that pretty clear feedback of what could be improved. So in my mind, a remaster, a simple remaster, addresses those two elements. A remake is a little trickier to navigate, and I will admit, when the Final Fantasy VII remakes were announced, I was not on board. I did not like the idea of them remaking Final Fantasy VII. I've since come around to the idea, because I think they did it well. which is, I mean, that's what it always comes down to, isn't it?
Tagline of the channel.
They took Final Fantasy VII and they maintained mostly only the characters and their relationships to each other. They reimagined the sequence of events that plays out. They completely rebuilt the gameplay. It doesn't play at all like Final Fantasy VII, the original. And they built everything in a new engine. So it's, you know, those characters that you loved from the original modernized, brought into a modern graphical representation. And it's really not the same story. It is a new game. And that is why I was so opposed to it at first, is because I didn't expect it to be a new game. I expected it to be a cash grab of, hey, here's all of that stuff you used to love. Again, give us money. And that would have been infuriating to me. And I'm happy to say that's not the direction that they went with it.
If I can just jump in on that note, that was always one of the most mystifying criticisms of it that I would hear online. It was normally just sort of a rage thing. You'd see people often saying like it's just a cash cow. They just want to print more money. That's why it's 3 games. They're making 3 enormous games with enormous development times, with enormous studio costs, with writing costs, with the soundtracks they're doing. It's probably a miracle if they make money on those. A cash grab, in my mind, it kind of goes the other way. It's the simple remastering. When you don't really have to do too much, you just get that game back out there. It was a PS1 game. Now it's on the PS3. It's the same. Now it's on the PS5, but it's the same. I like it when my remakes do something new, and that's kind of where I was with you, to be honest. The day it was announced, whenever that was, 10 years ago almost probably, I wasn't that excited. Probably tempered by the fact that there was no release date. It was always going to be a long time in the future. But also I had that perspective of, I already own Final Fantasy VII, and I know that I love this, and I can go and play this. It was only when I heard those sort of, not whisperings, they announced it well in advance, that it was going to be 3 parts rather than just 1. Okay, now you've got my interest. The first part's going to be focused in this one area of the game that was 3 or 4 hours long in the original. Now it's 30, and you get to explore the city a bit more. Okay, you've got me. The more I learned it was something new, the more I was interested. And that is where remakes, as opposed to remasters, get a lot more credit from me. If they're trying to do something new and something interesting. And honestly, with an IP like that, call it a simple cash grab, think about the animosity this has generated from some parts of the community. Quite the opposite. It's very much a big roll of the dice of, can we give this to our community and have them accept it? And I think that taking that chance is what made it inherently interesting for me.
Oh yeah, and I think we immediately recognized that it was an effort to capitalize on previous success, and that creates the possibility that it is a cash grab. But with everything they announced, it became more and more clear that no, this is a new game. It will capitalize on that nostalgia. It will capitalize on that previous connection that you've already built.
It definitely is a cash grab to some degree.
Yes,
because they know we like it.
It will not be copy paste. It's not going to be something you've seen before. It's not going to be the same stuff just repackaged and sold to you at a premium. Like it's something new. And that is what I needed to see before I came around to the idea. I have remasters in my collection, and rarely do I think, oh, I want this alongside the original. Overwhelmingly, it's like I bought the remaster because that was available and the original was not.
Yeah.
That's where the real joy of them come in. The Final Fantasy VIII remaster that I've mentioned, I will play it because you won't, because you hate it. The version I have easy access to. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more complicated. Yeah. It is, I can get that by going on the Steam store in 5 minutes time and paying whatever, €20. The original, finding a disc somewhere, getting myself a PS1, finding a damn SCART lead for the TV. Do those exist anymore? When it allows you that extra access to these old games, wonderful. But I don't see a huge amount of value in them outside of that. Outside of just giving you that chance to relive what you once enjoyed and possibly open it up to some new audiences. But no more.
Yeah, so when Origins moved over to EA, BananaHammockRepublic famously, I lost a lot of my stuff. So Even though I've had thousands of hours in Mass Effect, it said I had 0 hours when I had to redo some things. So it's whatever. But my point here is that I had all my discs and codes and all those old games like Mass Effect, the original, on there. I couldn't access it. And I have the CDs still, but I don't have a CD player. So thank God the Legendary came out, because I wouldn't have been able to play it, without it. But yeah, there is a trend going on right now though. It's not a bad trend. And I think I kind of want to liken it to like a restoration project for like a painting or something, because there's been a few times where they restore a painting and then they realize, wait a minute, there's a layer underneath all this stuff that we've done to preserve it. And so these other colors may come out that we didn't expect the painting to look like that. We've thought historically all these years that it looked like a certain way, but that's not how it's supposed to look. And so it's one thing to alter it, to do whatever, but there's also updating it to where this is what it was supposed to look like, by the way. You may not like it. You may not like that red sky that's now there. It was a blue sky before, maybe a dull gray or something, but it's actually a red sky. Totally different context. So when we look at games like Diablo or the Tomb Raider game, they play better. They're more functional. They even have a toggle switch of saying this is what it looked like before. It allows the developer, which Tomb Raider is probably a bad example for this because they weren't the original developer, but it allows the developer to go in there and say, this is actually what we intended for the gameplay to work. It's just at the time we couldn't get it to work because we just were constrained for one reason or another. Fortunately, Diablo 2 didn't add things like jumping mechanics or something, because that would have been horrible. But man, some of those fire effects that they had in there were like, because before it was just like, little pixel fires, and it was neat. It had like some great sound effects and everything, but on the remaster, it's nice. I like playing that during Spooky Month in October. Nice little game. It definitely has those feels. But Tomb Raider, I played all the original Tomb Raiders too, and they were hard to play. You actually would use the pixels, because it's a pixelated game. You could use the pixels to say, this is where I need to get to jump to there, because
I remember that.
Yeah. But now those are gone. So when you're playing on the remaster, you kind just have to know. And that's really the game intention. You're not supposed to kind of hack with your visual cue. It's not supposed to be a visual cue,
I never got around to. I actually found out just now when you were speaking about it that there are remasters of Tomb Raider. Mm-hmm. I knew of the reboot of Tomb Raider from sort of 2014, 13, whenever it was. And I played some of those a few years ago, long after they came out. This was probably just prior to COVID. I had a good time with them. I really enjoyed their reimagining. I didn't play all the games, I admit. I think I just played the first and a little bit of the one where you're climbing a mountain at the start. I thought they did a good job of just maybe showing us what these developers would have liked to have done if they had been able to. But bearing in mind, we did have the limitations of them working, I think, on a PS1 for the original, which doesn't quite have the power of your PS4 or PS5, wherever it might be. But I didn't know there was a remaster.
Yeah, the Tomb Raider specifically was also on PC, and that's why I was able to play it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I was just thinking about to what point, ultimately, and this is one of those points that sounds intelligent until you realize it's not that clever. And it's been thought by almost everyone. Art generally is derivative, just by definition. It's massively derivative. And I wonder to what point remastering and updating these games with modern graphics is just derivative and ultimately almost stops it being art, what you're doing. Almost takes away any inherent value that is in the game making process. And at what point you are now, rather than making a painting, you're doing a paint by numbers exercise.
I think that's where video gaming kind of departs from other media when you look at things like remasters and reboots. A remaster will typically be a recreation, the exact same thing. A remake or reboot will usually be, let's kind of return to this concept and then move in another direction. And I think in other media, you don't see that as much. Television shows and movies, they'll recreate the exact same movie with a new cast and new director, and it's mostly the same experience. I mean, obviously there are going to be differences when you get different people working on it, but they're not changing the story, they're not changing the themes, they're changing performances, they're changing cinematography, and you're not going to walk away with a completely different experience from watching one version of the same movie to a different version. And I think with reboots and remaster or remakes in video gaming, it's, hey, we know you like this. We're going to kind of reimagine it. We're going to go in a different direction. We're going to try something new with kind of an anchor to something we know you already like. And that I fully support. I am fully on board with trying something new, starting in a place that's familiar.
Yeah.
I'm not super on board with ending in a place that's familiar.
Yeah.
I've been there before. I don't need to go back.
Well, I think the analogy that was sort of forming in my head during what you were saying is, and this is very broad strokes, is a remaster is almost like giving you and he said VCR, fuck me. Almost like giving you a video of you as a kid at Christmas and you enjoying that moment from outside. But I think with a remake and a remaster, we're not giving you a video of you being that kid on Christmas. We want to try and make you feel like that kid on Christmas again. Sorry, a remake and a reboot, not a remake and a remaster. And I think that's it's a bit more noble. It's a bit more interesting. As a broad strokes approach, this is going to very much depend, because there have been remakes that are dire. There have been remasters of games that have been entirely and completely necessary because that game has been lost to time and it's letting you get back in there. There have been remasters that have just updated the graphics, but they've done so well and they've maybe inserted some quality of life improvements that it was worthwhile. So it's very broad strokes, but that's how I would almost imagine them, is that relationship to you as a child at Christmas and how they're trying to make you feel.
I felt that way, and I know you did too, Kom, when, I felt that way initially, and I still feel that way. I think you've changed your opinion on it, but Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Because I was like, I can play this game now. I didn't have the disc anymore. Something happened to it, and I was like, might be able to get it to work, but like many of those older games, like I have a few games that are DOS-based, that there's workarounds I have to do, right? So that one was one I was worried about, but it runs like butter. It runs great. And to me, I didn't play it enough because I had lost my stuff from before. I don't really remember what it looked like before and after. So I'm just happy to play that game.
That's almost an interesting evolution from, and this is us being of the age we are, we probably have memories of abandonware. These games that had just been lost and the legal status was a bit questionable. No one really knew quite who they belonged to when you were trying to find those online. Mm-hmm. The remaster in that context of bringing these games back, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, something so beloved, it could be a wonderful thing. Age of Empires 2, I believe that was a remaster, and then they expanded with new campaigns, I think. So they almost went in between the two. They brought it back as it was and then took that chance to throw in some DLC on top of that. That's interesting. And it would fly in the face of what I was saying earlier, which is I would prefer remakes and reboots. I guess that's part of being a human, right? Like your system that you think in your head that you prefer, you don't necessarily, because someone will throw a counterexample at you.
Yeah, Titan Quest is coming out with a new game. It's going to be Titan Quest 2. And you would think they would come out with just Titan Quest Reboot or something. I mean, they put out a DLC not even 4 years ago, but I mean, I haven't played it beyond the first 2 DLCs, but I've always loved that as an action RPG. I prefer that game, believe it or not, over Diablo 3, almost any other action RPG out there. There's so much variety within the game itself that lends itself for a natural, organic playthrough. Even though it's very linear as far as playing the game, the way you play it can just vary wildly. And what's really cool, and this is the only game that I know that does this, is the enemies that have a unique weapon or piece of armor, they're wearing it when they're attacking you. So when you kill them and they drop it, you put it on and it looks like what they were wearing. It's so neat.
But that's actually pulled me onto something which I didn't think of until about 5 seconds ago when Morrowind came into my brain. Do we have any thoughts or any other examples of the fan-made remakes? So I'm thinking of, I think it's Skywind, Sky Oblivion, which is the idea of bringing Morrowind into the Skyrim engine, bringing Oblivion into the Skyrim engine. Now, these are fan-led projects. These are fan-run projects. I presume they're free projects because I'd imagine there'd be all sorts of commercial issues with them selling that. And how actually interesting that is, and what a show of affection and love that is for the IP that you're working with, that you have people willing to sit down and do that. Do we have any other examples of that kind of thing taking place?
Wow. I'm trying to, there was the, Banana, you probably have a pretty good memory for this, but it was a game based on the Oblivion engine, but it was kind of like a puzzle game. It was set in Roman times.
This is calling to me. I don't know what this is, but this sounds fantastic.
It was completely fan made.
That's my thought as well.
Yeah, it's
I don't know what you're talking about, but I want to play it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Live stream, let's go.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Well, I got to research this because I know what it is. It's just, hold on.
I think, one of the examples that kind of what you were talking about, a fan-made remake or a remaster, unfortunately, because it's a Nintendo property, it didn't go so well. But there was the HD remake of Mario 64. And it was a fan-led project to rebuild Mario 64 in a completely different engine that allowed for an HD version. And it was very much a fan passion project where they were just fully on board with the original game and they wanted to modernize it. And because Nintendo is Nintendo, they shut it down, which is really unfortunate. And I mean, I would think not the reputation you want if you were Nintendo, but that does seem to be their MO, to basically shut down anyone who's doing any kind of third-party stuff with their property.
It's probably the reputation they don't want, but I think we've almost certainly shown that it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Because they've had that reputation for how long, and it doesn't seem to have made a huge impact. We still even praise Nintendo to the high heavens, almost on moral and ethical grounds. We use them as this example of a studio that gives you what you want, that cares. We valorize the way that they talk about their CEOs when the company isn't doing well, and the apportioning of the blame in the right places. So for what it does for their image, probably not very much. And I just wanted to follow up on the same kind of question. And that, for me, is a perfect example, especially if Nintendo opposed it, is to what point are these fan-made projects making up for a lack of effort on the studio's part at giving us these remasters that we want? Why are fans picking up the slack?
But there is one game that I could not remember. I had to pull it up, and it was The Forgotten City. It actually uses the Skyrim engine, but a lot of the faces look like they're from Oblivion. But that is 100% fan-made. So it's funny that you said that one, and I was trying to think of any other example outside of obviously what you had just mentioned. But that is actually a well-received and beloved game that got so much attention that he said, well, let me just upload it to Steam. And now it's, one of those things you look for a Steam sale for.
I think it's interesting that it doesn't fit into remake, reboot, remaster. They have literally just taken the engine, the creation kit, I would imagine, and made their own thing entirely, which goes well beyond the scope of what we were discussing. But the fact that it's within the engine almost
I think
fits it
that
back in.
ties back into exactly the question you just asked, which is at what point does the fans taking over kind of represent a failure on the developer's part? And when the fan, or in a few of these cases, you'll see that the developers provide fans with a workshop to build within the engine. And I think that's an incredible step on the developer's part to say, we want you to be a part of this as well. We want to see what you imagine for this world that we've created, or these characters, or just this kind of setting. And we want you to be involved in the creation process.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could always make the cynical argument that they're just putting the responsibility for enjoying their product on the gamers. But I think at a certain point, they're recognizing that there's a lot of talent out there. There's a lot of creativity that's not being tapped because those people just don't happen to be in the industry. And I think providing your fan base with the tools to kind of become a part of the creative process is in some ways more important than giving them what they want initially.
Well, I think as well, just very briefly on that point of at what point does it become cynicism on the part of the developer of letting our fans get in there and clean up our mess? Well, if you look very briefly at Skyrim mods that will be available, you've got Skyrim unofficial patch, which is doing a lot of heavy lifting. But then you've got Skyrim new quests, you've got Skyrim new graphics, new weapons, new combat balances. So it's an incredibly boring answer, but it's going to be a bit of both. And I would just like to lean in, hopefully, to the idea that it's more idealistic. We want to see what the world has for our game. We want to see what people can make. And if they're going to clean up some bugs on the way through, that's just great.
And it becomes a very difficult question to answer is whether or not a remaster is really in the same spirit of the original, because you're always going to have people who want to apply knowingly or unknowingly the philosophical argument of, when is a ship no longer the same ship? You can take apart a piece by piece, replace it with a brand new piece until it's 100% looks like the old ship, but it is 100% not the original parts. Is it still the same ship? So you can take that same argument and apply it to these games and say, look, it is essentially the same thing. We're just putting new things on it that may or may not go over with the intended viewer. It just depends player to player.
Yeah, I'd say that analogy of the ship, it's a little more ambiguous, I think, in gaming, because in the example of the ship, and I can't remember what the name of that is. It Theseus' ship or something like that? It's a famous historical figure or Greek mythological figure.
It's Theseus, yeah.
Okay. In that example, it's kind of the fact that it's his ship that is the important element. And I would say in video gaming, it's the experience you get from the game that's the important element. And if you're not changing that, then you're not changing the game. So when you're taking out pieces and you're making tweaks, if the experience is very much the same, it's the same game. You can polish that experience. You can improve that experience to the point that it's what was originally intended, and you'll see that with remasters. And I think that's where that analogy kind of needs to shift. Is you're not focusing on whether or not the game itself is the same. You're focusing on whether or not the player experience is the same. And if the player experience isn't really that different, then I think you fall into a different category. That's where remasters come in. It's the same experience, just polished. Remake has to be a different experience. A reboot has to be kind of tying to that original experience and going in a new direction. And that's where your focus needs to be if you are considering any one of those three options as a developer.
I've been playing Riven and Mist lately. Riven just came out as basically a remaster, remake. I don't know what to call it, because obviously the original was more or less a slideshow. And there's been several iterations of the Mist game, the original one, throughout the years. I think there's five, if I remember right. And I really, really enjoy them. There's actually a pretty compelling RPG underneath all that. It's not just a puzzle game. But this most recent version, the Riven, has been really, really interesting. And what I've noted is that I can only go with my guts here, is it feels the way I felt when the original Riven came out. And when the original Riven came out, to me, it was spectacular, superb. It was highly immersive. But essentially it was a slideshow. I mean, you didn't have, there was some video accompanying certain scenes, but for the most part, it was just that. And so to think, wow, what I'm seeing here is exactly what I felt. It shows an accomplishment of what they did back then with what they had. But this one is really, really there. Between the sound, the music, the graphics, it's all done very simply, but it's done so well and packaged so tight that it's like a burst of flavor all at one time, and it is just, it's a delight. So
I think it's funny that you describe it that way, as something that captures the feel of your first experience with the game, because that's ultimately what a lot of these games are trying to do, and it's a very imprecise kind of goal, I think, and that's what makes it really difficult to pinpoint as far as how to do it well, because you're trying to capture an experience, you're trying to capture an emotional response, and recreate it for either a new audience or kind of return an existing audience to that point in their lives when they first had that. And that's not intuitive. There's not a clear path that leads there. It's really, really tough. And I think, trying to do that with a game, you kind of try to prioritize which elements you think will get you there. Elements of gameplay, like mechanical like function in the game, will probably tie you back to that original experience. Music will certainly tie you back to that original experience, but if you try to make both of those too close, then it's just the experience they've already had. It's not that experience again, or that emotional response. It's a new emotional response to the same stimuli, and it's not the same.
And just as a small example of people who would appreciate a game like Mr. Riven, is that this one, the puzzles are the same per playthrough, but the answers to them are different.
That's pretty
So there's some math in the game. You have to figure out the math. You have to figure out what the hell goes on, what goes where. But the answers to those could vary. And so you can't just break out a guide like you used to. That's how they've thought about this. They didn't just simply say, let's take the old puzzles and all this. The puzzles are actually completely different from the original too, but they're still in the same line of context of what you're trying to accomplish. Sorry about that, Kom. What were we going to say?
No, that's interesting. That's where, for example, if we were ever to remake Outer Wilds, you would have to do something like that, because it's a game you can only really experience once in its purest form, and any other playthrough is purely for almost academic purposes, just by the way the game is made. I was going to go to what Banana had said about getting the response that you want from your audience, and really remasters, remakes, whatever. If you're trying to elicit that same emotional response that these people got from the original a long, long time ago, you've got some heavy lifting to do. I'd wager it's almost impossible. Multiple reasons. If I want to provoke a response from you, a new response, that's easy enough to do. But if I want to provoke an exact response to get you feeling how you felt a long, long time ago, it's going to be nigh on impossible. Not least because you've experienced it once, so that sense of novelty isn't there anymore. But also, and I mean this in the best of spirits about all of us, we got old. We changed. We're not as easy to make feel certain things as we once were. It's much easier for us to feel certain other things. Like, show me a child in distress in a video game when I was a kid. Didn't really bother me. Now I'm much more inclined to, screw it. I'm going to call it my maternal instincts. My maternal instincts have kicked in now.
Yeah, the original players of God of War now playing the current God of War.
But that's a very interesting idea, is they are essentially appealing to the same audience with X amount of years in between God of War 3 and God of War Reboot. And they've had to adapt themselves to this audience now that is different. They've grown up. They quite possibly have kids. They possibly have kids as a same age. What's he called? Is it Atreus?
Atreus. Yeah. Atreus.
Yeah. They probably have kids at the same age, and they're going to have a very, very different response to that world than they would have had if it was just God of War 3 being suddenly thrown at them now today, as they are. So it's quite an uphill battle for a remake, a remaster, again, whichever one, to fight, to appeal to that same audience who may not even be into gaming anymore. It's very possible. It's not quite as ubiquitous as you all think. There are people who do not game, or they gamed as a kid and they stopped gaming, who've had life take place around them, who've had their life circumstances and life events actually change. It's a tough thing to do. And for that, I think you have to give the few remakes, and I'm going to say it's a few because I'm sure there's a lot that don't, to manage to hit that, you really have to doff your cap to them. It's an impressive feat.
I missed my opportunity to say his name's Boy. Boy.
I think God of War is almost the perfect example, because you've showcased that, like, you can't give them what they experienced the first time again. And even with God of War, you see this progression, and Kratos grows as a character. He develops, and you'll see the backlash in the community where people want the original Kratos. And it's just like, you can't have that again. There's a reason that this new version of Kratos exists. And you played through it already. You saw it. You saw it play out in real time in front of you. And now you're seeing Kratos as the result of those previous experiences. And it kind of, I mean, in my mind, it's an excuse for me to dismiss that criticism of people who want the original Kratos again. It's just like, you don't know what you want. That character doesn't exist anymore. And if he did, it'd be boring. Because I don't want to see a rage-fueled monster who can't change. I don't want to see somebody who is tortured by past events never find closure. It's unsatisfying to continuously see him tortured by the same things and not develop. And for a community like God of War, which, let's be clear, this is not the entire community.
I say they seem generally to be very, very receptive to it. Look at the reviews the game has gotten, you know, and how beloved it is. But I've no doubt this exists. No
Yes,
doubt.
there's a very loud, small subset who is not happy about the fact that Kratos is behaving like a person.
Hold on. Oh yeah, no, they're in the comments right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading those.
How dare you?
Yeah. And
sorry, I didn't realize they were in the
I
stream as
can relate on a certain level. I do have those things in my life that provide comfort because they're unchanging. But I don't want that from a character in a story. I don't find it engaging anymore if the character doesn't grow and develop, doesn't change, doesn't respond, because ultimately that's what it is. Kratos has experienced far too much to be the same person he was. And to present him otherwise, to present him as the person he was at the beginning, kind of negates everything that he's been through. And I feel like it's wasteful to tell this story and not tell it accurately, to tell it in a way that makes sense.
on the simplest of levels. Development is what makes people interesting. And I don't really care about whether Kratos is a god, whether he's human. I don't really care, because the person playing the game, me, is a human. And what appeals to me is development. And I want to see people change. I want to see them grow. It's the same in gaming as it is in real life. We all know that's where, whenever you know someone like a friend, that's where the true joy of knowing someone actually is anyway. It's not the impression you got of them on the first time that you met. It's not the first few weeks of spending time together. It's over the years when you learn the weird things about them. And it's over the years when you see them actually changing. You see things that they leave behind and things that they take on that are entirely new. And that's so much more interesting. If you've got your friend Mike who goes out when he's 18 and beats people up down the pub, and then he's doing that when he's 35 and when he's 55, that stagnation is sad. and not in a fulfilling way, not in an emotional response way. That is just bleak. It's horrible. It was bad on the first night, and it got worse as time went on. But if you've seen this person then change and grow and become someone better, and in the case of Kratos, actually become a father, become this influence on this new young life, and seeing his response to the world change around him, that's genuinely beautiful in a way that you're not going to get if you stagnate. And quite frankly, we've already got 3 games of it, and that's more than enough.
Well, the PSP as well, so 4.
We've got 4 games of it. 5?
Yeah.
Do I need 2 hands? I got 2.
Yeah. Yeah, God of War is an amazing example because actually, when it was coming out, it was unknown whether or not they were going to get good reception or not because of the crowd that Banana's talking about. And of course, you have the regular crowd that still to this day will say, I don't really want to play God of War because he just seems like he's angry all the time, because that's kind of how it doesn't start that way, but I mean, it's clearly a lot of the video game footage that you see is just him beating up a lot of people, but there is that aspect of it. But play the game, find out, discover the hidden lore of Kratos, because it's really, really deep and wonderful. What maybe 2 or 3 games would you guys like to see either remade, remastered, rebooted, whatever?
Have I not been clear? None of them. None of them. Leave them in the past. No, I partially exaggerate. How about we take them one at a time so we've got time to think?
Yeah. I'll go first. KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, and then KOTOR again, and then KOTOR a third time. But
do you want to see them remaking it?
I don't care. I don't really care. It needs to be redone. Just revisit it so it's playable, because right now it's not even halfway playable. The fonts are way too small for most people. Not just because I'm old, but there's a lot of little things that could really be revisited that I think wouldn't be too difficult. But I know, it's my understanding, there's a remaster out there. It's passed from developer to developer, issues with different publishers like EA and stuff. So things are in the work, but I'm hopeful. The last thing I heard was where it's at now. The president of that dev was saying it's still going, it's still live. So that's hopeful there. And KOTOR 2 actually was, we haven't gone into it, but to me, I don't have time right now. It might be, for me, the best RPG story ever. Not because of the way it's told, not the game mechanics, none of that stuff. Just the story itself might be one of the best game stories I've ever run across. Bloodborne, it needs to come out, and there's just no workaround it. The Bloodborne needs to come out and be available to the masses.
So one of them is going to be an easy out for me, because I don't know that I necessarily care about the game being remade as much as I care about it being made available and functional on a platform where I can experience again. Escape from Monkey Island.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has tried to play that recently, even the Steam version.
Cool.
If you've tried to stream it, you'll lose your goddamn mind. It can't be done. The game refuses to cooperate. It crashes whenever I save it. It's infuriating. And I had played everything up into this in that series up to that game very recently on stream. People were excited for me to keep going, and I can't. It's infuriating.
It's gonna be okay.
It won't.
I know it's not gonna be okay. That was a lie.
As a consolation, I sent him a game. It's Willie Morgan and the
Curse of Bone Town.
Yeah, he went down to Bone
which
Town.
I proved on stream I am not mature enough to play, because naming a place Bone Town, I was immediately going to make a lot of juvenile jokes, and I did.
Welcome to Fuck Mountain.
But it was a great game. I still haven't finished it. I do want to continue with that, but I haven't made up my mind about whether or not I'm going to continue it on or off stream. Beyond that, I would say a remake of Final Fantasy Tactics. For a similar reason. I feel like it's not widely available at this point, because it was only on PlayStation, only on PSP, and it hasn't been ported to other systems except mobile. And I hate mobile gaming. So I would love to share that game with a wider audience. And however they go about doing that, if it's a remaster, which I wouldn't be as excited about, I'd still be happy that more people got to play it. But if it's a remake or a reboot, I'd be on board with that. That being said, I didn't care for Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is a similar game style. But it's a very different game. And that got a sequel, which is horseshit.
I think for myself, 3. One of them, I don't know if we mentioned it on stream last week or if it was just in a private discussion, but it's for the sake of availability. So for this, I'm going to go remaster Lost Odyssey, because I think it's a real shame that game has just been lost to time. One of those interesting RPGs where the protagonist isn't a teenager as well. The protagonist has lived a life. And that's a shame. I want to see that more. And maybe we'll see it more as people, who grew up gaming get into the industry. Maybe we'll see that more. But it was a nice early example of that. So I'm going to want a remake of Lost Odyssey. This might be an odd one, but I want a reimagining. And I want it to be a bit different. I want it to be a bit darker of Broken Sword 1. I just want to have that as like a real mystery. I want to have that as something with a thriller edge to it. I think I'd very much enjoy that. Think of some of those scenes. I think it's in Syria. Think of some of the scenes outside on the hotel in Paris with a nice horror edge or thriller edge. I'd love to play that. So that's a real reimagining. Not point and click, but we're going to have a sort of third-person detective game. And the other one is actually just kind of silly. I want the original theme park back. The original. I want theme park with my 9 floppy disks. And I don't want it remade. I don't want it updated. I just want the original theme park. And I want to see if that is as much fun as I remember.
Just that's what it was called, theme park?
Yeah, it is nothing complicated, just theme park.
I thought you were referring to Roller Coaster Tycoon. I was like, oh
no, before that.
Okay,
no,
yeah.
before that.
And I think I provided 2, but there is a third one, and I think it's actually in the works. So I've mentioned previously my love of Sierra games. Yeah. And Sierra's I guess 2 biggest series were Space Quest and King's Quest. King's Quest has a reboot, and I love it. Space Quest does not. There is I want to say like crowdfunded like Kickstarter or GoFundMe kind of page for a game called Space Venture, which is the same 2 developers from the original Space Quest. But I think Activision is involved, and there's some kind of intellectual property discussion that needs to be had, and it's not moving forward as well as everyone would hope. But I'm very, very eager to see that game released, if that ever happens.
A great choice. That is a great choice.
Yeah, I'm pretty great.
And that's where we're ending. We never end on a normal note. This was something
we can end on that note right after about 50 people unsubscribe from the channel.
Well, I will add that if any viewers have a comment of their own, a game that they would like to see remastered, rebooted, whatever, just go ahead and drop it in the comments. We definitely try to respond to every single comment that comes along. But if you like the video, please give it a like. Subs are free in YouTube, and always hit the alert button so that you know when we either go live or post a new video. But these videos should be available to you every Monday and Friday. But at some point, hopefully we'll create a playlist for you, but because we'll have more content than just the podcast, but we'll see. To be determined. All right. I will check you guys later. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.